So even if the Big Bang is true, atheism is still false. And the reason we know the Big Bang could not have taken place is because you cannot convert dust to water.
Welcome back everyone to Bridge the Divide, where we examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how with education, rationality, and reason we can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, we're taking a look at a video from everyone's favorite irascible, hate-preaching apologist, Matt Powell. And in this one, he talks about what he claims to be as the one surefire way that his fellow believers can lead non-believers to believe in Christianity. So truly, Matt, this is a bold claim, one that I am certain that every single Christian in the world needs to hear. So forgive me if I find it a little strange that you set this video to private on your YouTube channel. Why exactly wouldn't you want all your fellow Crimsbobs to hear your great revelation, Matt? Perhaps the devil is in the details. Let's dive in.
The best way to convince an atheist that Christianity is the truth
is by providing evidence that the God that the entire theology is built up around actually exists as a thing in reality. That was easy.
Is by sitting down with them and not debating, but simply asking them if you could share what your point of view is about the origin of life and about the afterlife and heaven.
That's also pretty easy. While not conclusively determined yet, per the evidence that is currently available, the origin of life on this planet was most likely the result of a process that we call abiogenesis, which, to put in very simple terms, describes the formation of self-replicating molecules from the interactions of naturally occurring organic chemicals. As far as an afterlife goes, there is no evidence that such a thing actually exists, so there is no rational reason to believe that one does. All the available evidence indicates that conscious experience ends upon biological death, which is the irreversible cessation of all bodily functions, which by the way is distinctly different from clinical death, which is the cessation of heartbeat and breathing, but the brain is still functioning.
And if they say yes, most of the time they'll say no, but if they say yes,
I'm not sure why they wouldn't. Unless, of course, they either know that they don't know enough about the topics to confidently talk about them, or they just don't want to talk about them with you.
You need to caringly and calmly tell them what the facts are and what the truth is.
Well, facts being propositions that have been demonstrated to be true, and truth being that which corresponds to, is logically consistent with, and is applicable within reality, such as with novel predictive models. Unless you have that evidence of the existence of the God that your entire worldview is predicated upon, as I mentioned earlier, then you have no rational reason to conclude that anything you present within the scope of that worldview is either facts or true.
And a lot of times people will not care about how much you know until they know how much you care. Very important.
While I get the push to approach the conversation from a position of calm understanding, despite the fact that your appeal here is directly contradicted by your own behavior.
Dude, you will go to hell! I am not joking! Look at me!
Matt, stop.
Look at me!
Stop.
You look at me right now!
Stop!
Such as when you openly called for the mass executions of members of the LGBTQ community.
You know, and the morals that our country are founded on. And as far as homosexuality goes, you know, I believe the Bible puts a death penalty on it.
Now, did you mention something? You don't believe that gay people should be stoned to death, do you?
I believe the Bible puts a death penalty on it. Obviously not by me or by anybody, you know, in our regular society. Obviously, I believe it's the government's job to execute criminals. And, you know, I believe that the Bible says clearly that homosexuality is a criminal crime. It's a crime. It's one of the worst crimes ever.
The fact that you say you care, or even if you honestly do care about your message, has zero bearing on whether or not what you believe is actually the case. I myself have interacted many times with calm and understanding theists, as well as ones that have completely blue-screened out at the moment I mention their first contradiction or fallacy. And you know what they all have in common, Matt? None of them can demonstrate that the gods that they claim to exist actually do exist independently of mind and context without begging the question. Thus, they cannot provide any rational reason to believe that the entities that they claim to exist actually do. And if it is the case that you yourself are in the exact same boat as they are, then your little appeal here amounts to nothing more than just an advocacy for emotional manipulation.
So put a smile on your face, and I would start out by mentioning the fact that atheism is truly based in mysticism.
And there's the problem right there, Matt. You can make your presentation through a 5,000 watt smile. It ultimately won't matter if the first thing you do is deliberately misrepresent the other person's position. If you have to deliberately lie about the position of the very person that you're speaking to in order to set the stage for your presentation, then you've already cut your own legs out from under you.
Think about it. If the world created itself, that is by definition a magic act.
And as I and many others have explained to you ad nauseum, we don't hold that position. No one other than theists is claiming that something came from nothing. And no matter how many times you choose to misrepresent Lawrence Krauss on this, it's not going to change. In your worldview that I myself have heard you articulate, your uncreated God existed eternally everywhere in a timeless, spaceless state, which by the way is just a flat-out logical contradiction. And then this entity actualized out of nothing the entirety of the not God set, which is the set of all things that are not itself, through no identifiable mechanism. It simply just did it. That is what we refer to as magic. Hence the apropos nicknames of Sky Wizard, Sky Fairy, and Sky Daddy. You're literally describing your own worldview.
It is not scientific in any way to assert that matter and energy could create itself, that it could pop into existence on its own.
Which is why we don't do that, because that is not what the evidence shows. Per the evidence that allowed us to establish the first law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So we don't claim that energy was ever created. And we have confirmed that energy converts into matter and that matter can convert back into energy, making them essentially interchangeable. In a fundamental sense, the existence of matter is contingent upon energy. And there is no evidence to indicate that energy has ever not existed.
An outside force had to create time, space, and matter.
Nope, not if these things are just phenomena that result from work being done. But even if it were the case that an outside force was necessary, that would still not entail that that outside force was your particular God. Even if you've arbitrarily decided to define it as being that thing, you'd still have to demonstrate that it actually exists to do the things that you claim it's doing.
Either one of two things happened. Either God created this world, or everything created itself from magic.
And that's a false dichotomy. Another logically possible option is that the universe has always existed in one form or another and simply changes states.
Either time, space, and nature poofed into existence from a mystical act of randomness.
You can't even keep your terminology consistent, Matt. First you claim that atheists think everything came from nothing, then you claim that if everything didn't come from a god, that it had to have come from a mystical act, which implies the existence of something to do that action which would not be nothing. You just can't help but contradict yourself, can you?
Or it was designed.
Or it just always existed sans any entity with intention. You can repeat the false dichotomy as many times as you like, but it's not going to change what it is.
Intelligent design is true.
There is no evidence to support that notion. The teleological argument is just a result of observer bias.
And even if we granted that the Big Bang happened,
which it did, the evidence for that event is literally observable right now.
It would still require supernatural power to be able to convert nothing into something.
And that's just a straight non sequitur born out of either personal incredulity or an argument from emotion, and then justified with a complete misrepresentation. After all the years of doing this, Matt, I thought you would have at least figured out how to represent the other side accurately, because at this point I think it's safe to say that it's no longer a matter of willful ignorance. You're just straight up lying. But like I always say, when it comes to Christian apologetics, the commandments are really more conditionals than they are universals.
So even if the Big Bang is true, atheism is still false.
And those two concepts are not even related. Atheism does not make cosmological claims. Even if everything we knew about cosmology, physics, quantum mechanics, or any other scientific field was completely wrong, it would not logically entail that the position of not believing in the existence of a god or gods was not rationally justified.
And the reason we know the Big Bang could not have taken place is because you cannot convert dust to water.
Wait, what?
So, I'm not even really sure how to begin to address that, but I will try my best. Firstly, no one is claiming that dust converts into water. That's just a profoundly stupid statement. Dust is the term that we use to describe collected particles of inorganic and organic materials. This can include, but is not limited to, things like soil, sand, lead, microplastics, fabric fibers, pollen, dust mites, and shed hair and skin cells. And these particles themselves are of course composed of many different elements. Water is just dihydrogen monoxide, 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Second, no one is claiming that dust was created by the Big Bang. Big Bang cosmology describes the expansion or inflation of the current universe from an origin point of observability. Third, the various naturally occurring elements that are present in the universe have different sources, and they interact with each other in various ways under different conditions. Now, while the various elements themselves that compose what we call dust and water do have their roots in nucleosynthesis, the chemical processes that result in these two separate things is completely different. And lastly, your conclusion that the Big Bang is impossible because dust cannot convert into water is just a brain-dead non sequitur. Don't tell me that this tripe is the stuff that you're trotting out to try and convince non-believers of the truth of Christianity.
Think about it. You would have had H2O convert from dust particles.
No, because as I said, the sources of these various elements are different. Hydrogen, which is the most abundant element in the universe, formed through nucleosynthesis. Oxygen, the third most abundant element in the universe, is formed through nuclear fusion within the cores of massive stars. But in a biological system, it is a byproduct of photosynthesis. Dust particulates, however, did not exist, nor were they produced by the inflation event. The cooling event that occurred after what we call the Big Bang led to the formation of hydrogen, helium, and lithium. The various inorganic and organic elements that compose what we call dust would come about as a result of other chemical interactions that occurred much later in the life of the universe.
It doesn't make any sense.
You're right. Nothing you're saying here makes any bit of sense because it literally flies in the face of known reality.
326 million trillion gallons of water exist on Earth alone.
And that is the first true thing you've said in this video.
And to say that all of that was condensed as energy, they claim, in an infinitely dense hot point, is ludicrous and absurd, and it is demonstratively false.
Yeah, because 1, we don't claim that, and 2, because it's not true. Are you seriously claiming that Big Bang cosmology describes the inflation event as having created the entirety of the universe as it exists right now in its current state? This has to be some underhanded, intellectually dishonest way of trying to keep your young Earth creationism position alive, isn't it? Because nothing of what you're claiming is what these fields of science claim.
And once an atheist begins to understand
that you're completely full of shit and have no actual conceptualization of any of the things you're talking about, and so should not trust anything you have to claim about anything you can't demonstrate to actually exist or be the case,
that God is their creator.
That's a positive claim. Still waiting for that evidence that such an entity exists without you begging the question.
That God made them, and that God loves them because he gave them the gift of life, the gift of human existence.
Yet another appeal to emotion.
It's very important to explain then that Jesus is the truth and that he has shown himself to be authentic.
Oh, really?
If somebody could die and then come back from the dead, that means that that individual has power, authority, and credibility. Jesus did raise from the dead.
No, that's a story in a book that through behavioral conditioning and an unhealthy dose of willful ignorance you believe is true. Doesn't mean it's actually true.
And many historians will even admit that.
No historians admit that such an event actually took place. They record that through history there was and still is a group of people that believe such an event took place. But there is no historical record of the resurrection taking place. The only source for that claim is the text that composes the Bible. This is why, while the crucifixion is often considered historical, because crucifying people who broke the law was pretty much a pastime in ancient Rome, the claim of the resurrection is blanketly considered theological.
And what that tells us is that the New Testament is authentic.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Think about it. The New Testament is 27 different books that are all compiled together in one book.
Which is completely irrelevant to whether or not the claims within them are true.
And the Gospels contain eyewitness accounts of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection.
No, they contain hearsay accounts of a story that was spread by members of that cult. 1, the authors of the Gospels were anonymous, and 2, the Gospels were not composed until decades after the purported event, not to mention the ridiculous number of contradictions within the Gospels themselves.
And when Jesus died and resurrected from the dead, it shook up all of history so much. Scholars in the first century like Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and so on and so forth were writing about Jesus of Nazareth and about how he had done many miracles and how he had risen from the dead and how people were giving their lives for their belief in the resurrection.
And that's a complete misrepresentation of all those individuals. The work attributed to Flavius Josephus, who himself was not a Christian, that centered around Jesus is widely acknowledged to be a Christian interpolation. Only the scant stuff that he wrote about Jesus' brother is considered to be truly authentic. The work of Tacitus, who also was not a Christian, was just a reporting of what one particular group believed at the time. And Pliny the Younger, also not a Christian, talked about the cult of Christianity in his letters to Emperor Trajan, in which he was seeking the emperor's advice on how to judiciously deal with their disruptive antisocial behavior in the public square. These are not affirmations of the truth of Christianity. They were affirmations that people existed who believed that Christianity was true.
People were actually seeing Christ risen from the dead, and it was shocking people. Hundreds of people at a time were often seeing Jesus.
And again, no, that claim is coming from the writings of Paul, and none of it is verifiable. Essentially, you don't have hundreds of claims about one guy, you have one guy's claim about hundreds of people.
And they were absolutely blown away, and they went around Rome and Italy and told people, we've seen someone who died and came back from the dead, and we are placing our faith and trust in him.
So at this point, Matt is just preaching here, basically emotionally extrapolating about things that may or may not have occurred in the ancient past. But he's still deliberately ignoring the fact that just because a group of people believed a thing was true, doesn't mean that the thing they believe is true. This is just an appeal to popularity.
Think about it.
You keep saying that, yet you keep refusing to do it yourself.
But if somebody could die and come back from the dead, don't you think it would be a good idea to consider what he or she has to say?
Not if what they're saying cannot be demonstrated to be true. This is why faith is not an epistemological tool. It's an emotional one utilized only to affirm one's feelings.
All of the other messiahs of the false religions of this world, as far as I know, are still in the grave. None of them actually rose again.
And we don't believe the incredible stories about those figures, such as the Mahdi in Islam, Saoshyant in Zoroastrianism, Kalki in Hinduism, Maitreya in Buddhism, and Li Hong in Taoism, any more than we believe the one you claim about yours.
The New Testament has authority.
Only if you choose to abandon all reason and logic.
And it's important to explain that to people who are skeptics of the Word of God.
Well, first, you haven't even crossed the initial threshold yet, demonstrating that your God actually exists to do anything. So right off the bat, you're just begging the question. And second, virtually everything you've said here, apart from that one scientific fact about the amount of water on the Earth, was a complete lie either about science, history, or the position of the very people you're trying to convert. In fact, all you've really done so far is provide even more rational justification for skepticism and non-belief. Be honest, Matt. Your real intent here is to try and make more atheists by deliberately showing how phenomenally broken the reasoning behind Christianity is, isn't it?
We have more evidence for the existence of Jesus than we do for George Washington.
You can tell we're almost at the end of his video because he's not even trying to obfuscate his lies anymore.
Or Abraham Lincoln, or John Adams, or any of the presidents of the past. We have so much evidence that has been compiled together for the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus.
You don't. You have a source for that theological claim, and you have a handful of sources that repeat that theological claim. By that logic, one could justify claiming the Odyssey was a historical account.
It's what shows that all of the past prophets were correct when they prophesied about a coming Messiah.
They weren't, and that's still a hotly debated topic within the scholarship.
And it also shows us that whatever has been prophesied about the future is also going to come to pass.
It doesn't. That someone may have gotten a prediction right in the past does not indicate that any other predictions they may make will come true. None of your reasoning here is logically consistent, Matt, but I am quite certain you're already aware of that.
And so we can put our faith in Jesus. We can put our faith in the fact that he died, was buried, and rose again the third day.
As I stated previously, faith is not a tool for epistemology. There simply is no reason to use it for anything at all, let alone trying to get one to the truth. Try and remember, Matt, that faith claims are not equivalent to knowledge claims. You can't demonstrate that your faith claims are true. They're just propositions that you want or hope to be true.
We can place our trust and our hope in him.
Nah, I've been much better served in my life by placing my trust in my own capabilities and the capabilities of those who have earned my trust. That way, when things sometimes don't turn out the way I expect or want them to, I know exactly how and why the failing occurred. This also means I'm never emotionally confounded by the mystery of your God's apparently capricious nature.
And once people realize that Jesus really existed,
Doesn't logically entail that he was also supernatural in nature.
and that he did die for our sins,
Doesn't logically entail that sin actually exists or that such an event was logically necessary. It's just evidence that a cult leader died for what he believed in. Throw a stone in human history and you'll likely hit some other delusional megalomaniac who went to their death thinking they were saving the world.
we need to encourage them to put their faith in Jesus alone to get them to heaven.
Which of course assumes that a heaven exists, which assumes a God exists. Neither of which you've demonstrated to actually exist. Your entire presentation here has been nothing more than you showing off your impressive collection of committed logical fallacies. And you think that's what's going to convince me that what you believe is true? Because you advocate for delivering this nonsense with a smile?
Boy, you must be outside your mind.
And we're going to skip this last bit because it's just Matt repeating his unfounded claims and doing his country boy best to try and convince people to abandon all reason and logic in order to accept what his cult is trying to sell them. And I have to say, Matt, that if this was your honest attempt at trying to convince non-believers of the existence of your God, then there's no wonder that you preface this entire thing with a warning for your fellow believers to not engage in debate.
The best way to convince an atheist that Christianity is the truth is by sitting down with them and not debating.
I think I now understand exactly why you set this video to private. Likely because you did in fact learn one thing from engaging with us non-believers over the years. You learned that in the reasoned discourse of debate, your worldview simply cannot survive. When it comes to bridging the divide here, the message is pretty simple. If you're going to levy a critique against another person's position, it's important to represent that position accurately to avoid strawmanning it. And when someone like Matt here commits to that fallacy so consistently, it becomes painfully obvious that their only real interest is in preaching at those individuals they've convinced themselves no less than they do. The best way to combat this kind of behavior is to actively listen to what is being said and call out the lies and misrepresentations as they occur so that they can be corrected and everyone can be on the same page. Even in the face of sheer intellectual dishonesty, such an effort will never go to waste, because it's always an opportunity to try and ensure that at least one less person will be victimized by cult-advocating charlatans, conmen, and grifters. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, July is National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. A link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And if you like what you saw here and would like to support this channel further, links to channel membership and to get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear are also in the description. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together we can bridge the divide.